Hi. Welcome to Private Parts. I have my best friend / sister, Tess Macrae, here today, and baby on set. So we might get a little distracted by a very sweet little human down there.
Yeah.
So we're going to chat about prolapse.
Mm-hmm.
Can you just tell us a little bit about what prolapse is in general?
Absolutely. So this is for a maternal health session, so I'm primarily going to be talking about prolapse after childbirth.
Yeah.
But prolapse basically means that part of your body is where it's not meant to be, and that usually refers to in the vagina or the anus when something has changed and bits of your body are outside of where they would normally be. So usually for vaginal prolapse or post-vaginal birth, there's three main types. One is where your bladder kind of bulges through into your vagina. One is where your bowel bulges through because the walls are weakened. And the other is what's called uterine prolapse, where your uterus actually drops down into your vagina and in extreme cases can fall out of your vagina.
Entirely?
It can fall right out.
Goodness.
Yeah.
So in your case,
yeah,
what type did you have? How did that impact you?
Well, I've been quite lucky. I had what's called a cystocele or a bladder prolapse. So one of the walls on the side of my vagina, after having that child over there that's making cute noises, I've said, when I had heard the vaginal walls weakened, and so I had a bulge through of my bladder. There's degrees of prolapse. So both obstetricians, gynecologists, and also pelvic floor physios have ways of measuring it, and basically it's how much it drops down and potentially protrudes from your vagina.
Yeah.
So a low degree prolapse is kind of sits there and bulges in. A mid degree prolapse will sit at the very edge of your vagina, and a really high degree prolapse will actually protrude from your vagina. So there's kind of levels of extremity. I was quite lucky, mine never protruded out, but it was sitting right there for quite a while.
And how did you realise that? Like, are there classic symptoms? Or
there are classic symptoms. The way I like to describe the feeling of being symptomatic, so that means you feel it, and that's when it's an issue. You can have a prolapse for your whole life and not feel it. It's not symptomatic, so it's not an issue. But if it's symptomatic, it feels like you have a really full, heavy tampon slipping out of your vagina. That's what it kind of feels like, always. Yeah, particularly when you're carrying something, when you cough or sneeze, and it's often accompanied by incontinence. So, you can't control your wee as much. I was really lucky. I didn't get my prolapse until I was 6 weeks postpartum. So often women straight away after, particularly vaginal birth, feel a change in their vagina. And over half of the women who deliver vaginally have a prolapse of some degree. So it's so common, and people don't talk about it because it's a vagina and it's uncomfortable, and often people don't realise because so much changes in your body when you're pregnant, and then so much changes when you give birth, and particularly if it's your first birth, which mine was. I hadn't been pregnant before and I hadn't given birth before. You don't really know what it's going to feel like or look like. It's a bit scary. I had also had a tear, so I had stitches. So there's all these things that you're not really sure of. But for me, I had a very clear moment. We had friends over for dinner. I went over to the toilet for a poo at night, which is unusual for me. And I had a poo, and I was like, walking back to the house, I was like, I don't feel like I finished that poo. And I went back and I tried again, and straight away I was like, something's not right in my vagina. Like I knew straight away that something wasn't right. I'd heard prolapse mentioned, so I was like, I feel like I might have a prolapse, but I didn't really know. And I went back and we had people there for dinner. So I was like, I don't really want to talk to everyone about this now. But I just went into the bathroom and I just had a little feel, and I was like, there's something in my vagina that wasn't there.
Yeah.
And I got my partner to have a look. And I was like, can you look? I don't want to look. Can you look? And he was like, oh, yeah, that doesn't look normal. And he'd been checking my stitches for me after I'd given birth. And so he was kind of familiar with my post-birth vagina, and he knew it wasn't normal. Because it was 6 weeks after, my stitches had healed. It all looked pretty normal down there. So it wasn't like in the immediate aftermath, I was like, oh, I don't know what's happening. I knew straight away that something wasn't right.
Yeah.
I was really lucky. I got into a doctor the next day, and he checked and he said, yes, I think it is a prolapse, but you need to go to a pelvic floor physio because they're the ones that fix everything. They're amazing. So I got in really quickly, and I've been on a program ever since with an amazing pelvic floor physio who's since just had a baby, and now I'm working with one of her colleagues, and they are fantastic.
So in more mild cases, things like pelvic physio and stuff work. Are there cases where you might need surgery or medical intervention like that?
Yes. 1 in 5 women in Australia will have surgery for prolapse at some point in their life, most likely.
Not 1 in 5 with prolapse, 1 in 5
women, I believe that's the case. Yep. So often it's later in life when usually like 50s and 60s. There isn't high success rates, I don't think, with prolapse surgery, but it's kind of like a fix it. Try to fix it and hope if people do the right exercises with the surgery, it helps. There's some success, I believe, with laser therapy on building up and strengthening the vaginal wall until you can kind of strengthen it yourself. And then basically, I mean, everyone should do pelvic floor physio anyway because it's so good for everything. But if you've given birth or been pregnant, then you basically need to do pelvic floor physio for the rest of your life.
Were you told that pre-birth? Like, was that part of the narrative?
I had a fantastic midwife that worked with me throughout my whole pregnancy and did all the follow-up postpartum. So she was checking me. I didn't have any signs, so she didn't really have to go into prolapse with me too much. And at 6 weeks, you get a check with your obstetrician. They make sure that everything's okay, kind of give you the all clear to have sex if you're comfortable to have sex again. They just make sure everything's all right. I had my 6-week check the day before I got my prolapse, and everything was okay.
Yeah.
I was riding my mountain bike, 2 or 3 weeks after I'd given birth. I was starting to feel like myself again. I was like, yes, I gave birth, and my vagina just went shoop and back, and I felt good. So then, the day after that is when I was like, oh no, and I got really good medical support. But I was also comfortable to examine myself, to get my partner to have a look, and comfortable to go and get help. And I think a lot of women would find that quite confronting, or they wouldn't know their body maybe well enough. So I feel relatively lucky. I hadn't been given lots of information about prolapse though. And since talking to so many of my friends who have given birth, I just tell everyone, I don't care. I tell everyone I've got prolapse, whatever. And people are like, oh, I had a bit of that, or my mum had that, or my friend had that. I'm like, oh, why didn't you tell me? Like, why didn't you tell me you had that? Well, I could have come and helped supported you. And they're like, oh, I don't know. I just don't really talk about it. And then I've also had friends I've talked to who have said, oh, I think I might have something like that. It's been there for like 2 years. I just, wee a bit when I jump on the trampoline with the kids, or when I sneeze or laugh or cough, or I just can't run. And that's crap.
Yeah.
Because we've got such good supports. Hospitals, maternity wings in hospitals usually have dedicated pelvic floor physios, but you have to kind of seek it out. If it happens while you're in the hospital, they'll follow it up with you, but it often is a bit delayed. And that was, for me, I think, it was a bit tricky. I've had a beautiful pregnancy. I was really active through my pregnancy. I was had a really relatively good birth. I felt really physically good. And afterwards I kind of went back to normal very, very quickly. Maybe got on the mountain bike a little too quickly.
Yeah, maybe.
We
can talk about this later. My opinion.
Yes, but I felt fine. So my body felt right. And my midwife just said, look, your body will tell you when something's not right. Just take it easy. So I was kind of like, I'm back. I'm feeling great. And so it was quite a blow for me, because when you look stuff up about prolapse, it can be quite scary. You haven't heard about it, so you're Googling, like, I've got a bulge in my vagina. It's like surgery. They've had some really awful stuff with mesh implants that you might have heard about. There was really terrible ongoing complications with that. It's like, you might need to wear incontinence pads forever. And I was like, oh, I feel like I've just stopped bleeding after birth. I don't want to go back to wearing pads all the time and feel like I'm leaking out of everything. So there's all that kind of fear, and then, you know, thinking maybe I'm never going to be able to run again, carry a pack again. You know, you're not meant to carry your baby. When I went to see the doctor, they were like, well, just don't do any heavy lifting. I was like, well, what's heavy lifting? Thinking they might be like, just avoid lifting 20 kilos. And they said, try not to carry the washing. I was like, I'm a mum, I wash nappies. That's what I do. Like, I wash nappies and I carry my baby.
Yeah.
I've got a 6-week-old.
Can't avoid
How do I not do those things? And, you know, don't sit for long periods, feed lying down, feed in bed, you know, avoid standing for long periods. So initially I was like, oh my God, I can't do this. You know, I've got a 100-metre walk to my toilet. There's all these things like that where I was like, oh, I live in the bush. I'm really active. That's a huge part of who I am. That's a huge part of managing my mental health. I don't know what effect this is going to have. And it wasn't until I went to a pelvic floor physio, she was like, okay, well, yes, we're going to have to make some changes for now, and you are going to have a bit of time off your bike, but you will get back to your bike. And every session I had with her, she would say, okay, what's our goal for next session, which was in 2 or 3 weeks? And I'd say, I'd really like to be able to walk with a backpack in 2 weeks' time. And she'd say, okay, well, that's our goal. And then I just got back to running really recently, and it's like very, very slow and working up to it. But the pelvic floor physios just made it so manageable, and they were not over the top. And they said, this happens to so many people and you will be okay.
Yeah.
And yes, we can talk about options like surgery and laser, but we probably don't need to. They said maybe when you're 60, you'll need to look at that. And probably by then we'll have better ways of treating it anyway.
Yeah.
And, you know, there's also, I was like, am I not going to be able to give birth vaginally again? Because if I can, I would love to have another baby, and I would love to deliver vaginally. And they were really good. They kind of said, well, it might affect it, but come and see us when you're wanting to get pregnant, and we'll do lots of work on your pelvic floor prior.
Yeah.
And so I feel really confident that I can live the life I want to live. I've been hiking with my baby, like multiple day hikes with all my stuff on my back and baby on the front. I've been riding. I feel strong in myself. So I'm feeling really good now. But there was a couple of weeks where I was just like, what does life look like with this?
Yeah.
And I want to be active, and I want my baby to see me being active. And I don't want her to grow up where her dad does all the heavy lifting. I don't want that. Like, I do the heavy lifting. I want her to be able to see me splitting wood and using the chainsaw and, hey, little one, and doing all that. And so I think a lot of the gendered roles that come in naturally because the mother is breastfeeding or recovering with stitches or whatever just get exacerbated with conditions like that. And both my partner and I have been really mindful about what we're modelling for our daughter.
Yeah.
So all that kind of plays into it as well. And I think having a baby is a big thing, and I actually had a relatively smooth ride of pregnancy, childbirth and postpartum. But I think if you had a really tough pregnancy, if you're experiencing postpartum anxiety or depression, something like that could just be really terrible, and I know it has been for a lot of women, and they don't want to talk about it, or they don't feel comfortable, or they don't know they can.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or they don't even know that something is wrong. In the
They
first place.
they just think, oh, my vagina's different because I've had a baby, which of course it is.
Yeah.
Like you've pushed this baby out of a pretty small hole.
Yeah.
It's crazy. There's not more that goes wrong, and you can have prolapse just from being pregnant, from the extra weight. Being really overweight can cause prolapse because your body is dealing with so much pressure. Even having like a persistent cough.
Yeah.
There's lots of being constipated and straining. There's lots of ways you can get prolapse.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's very, very common for women post childbirth. Yeah.
Yeah. I feel like Bonnie wants to get on set, so we might bring her in for a moment, because
hey, little one,
you want to be in here with your auntie and your mama.
Hey, little baba.
And here's the reason you prolapse.
Yeah.
Little Bonnie Macrae. Well, thank you for explaining that to us.
No worries.
I'm sure we're going to do a few more eps and talk all the nitty-gritty of pregnancy and baby life.
Yeah.
But thank you.
Thanks for having me. It's so important. Love you.
Love you.
Love you.
Hey, little prolapse maker. Modern time. Oh, perfect. Perfect timing, Bon.
Oh, you're so snotty. Oh, you're so snotty. Oh, gross.